Hey, this is Wyatt Vaughn with the New Orleans Junior Journalism Program. I'm here talking some college football today. I'm going to be previewing the top 6 college football bowl games this season, also known as the New Year's Six Bowl. So let's get right into it. First, we got the Sugar Bowl. Number 5, Georgia going against number 15, Texas. Georgia feeling a little angry, a little sad that they're not in the playoff after nearly taking down number 1 Alabama in the SEC championship game. And I think the biggest thing for this game right now, I think it's going to be Colin Johnson and Lil Jordan Humphrey for Texas going up against star cornerbacks for Georgia. DeAndre Baker, who won the Thorpe Award, which is the best defensive back in the country, and former 5-star recruit Tyson Campbell. I think that's the biggest thing in this game. Sam Ehlinger, he's not the greatest quarterback. He makes throws. He's a good runner. But if Colin Johnson and Lil Jordan Humphrey can help him out, get some good separation on the outside, it should help him, and it should allow for the Texas offense to also get the running game going, which is a big thing. Trey Watson, Keontae Ingram, they're going to need that in order to beat this a strong UGA team. Another thing is, can Georgia pressure Sam Ehlinger? Georgia hasn't been very good at pressuring the quarterback all year. They did a pretty good job of it against Alabama, but most of that was down to the coverage that they were playing. It was really locking up the Alabama wide receivers. And when Tua Tagovailoa needed to make a big throw in a tight window, he really struggled to do that, which is why he had the 2 interceptions. So if UGA can play some tight coverage, also mixed with some good pressures here and there, that should be a good recipe to stop this Texas offense. On the other side of the ball, Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift for Georgia have been absolutely incredible the past couple of weeks. Jake Fromm, in a loss last week, played one of the best games of his career against Alabama. He played so well. He was making perfect throws here and there. Isaac Nauta got into the game. Mecole Hardman, Riley Ridley, all those wide receivers, and Isaac Nauta, a tight end, obviously, really did well in that game. And Alabama really didn't have any answer for them until late in the second half when Georgia faked a punt, which wasn't good. But anyway, Texas – in my eyes, Texas has got to get pressure on Fromm, and they've got to be able to stop Swift. If Georgia's a 2-pronged attack here and Swift and Fromm are just both lacing it up, doing it well, there's no way Texas is going to be able to stop them. Texas has to pick one, in my opinion. I think if Texas wants to stop Georgia, they're either going to have to say, okay, Jake Fromm, you're not going to be able to pass the ball today. Or they're going to have to say, okay, DeAndre Swift, Elijah Holyfield, you're not going to be able to run the ball today, and we're going to go with Jake Fromm passing the ball. I think that's what Texas is going to have to do for this very potent Georgia offense. Georgia really hasn't been the same since they lost by 20 points to LSU back in October. Since then, this has been a completely different team and an all-around better team, a team that you could argue could be one of the top 4 teams in the country. So the next game we've got going on is we've got the Peach Bowl, number 7 Michigan, number 10 Florida. I think this game is going to play out a very old-time kind of game, very defensive. I don't think there's going to be a ton of points here. I think the biggest thing, first of all, for Michigan on offense, I think Donovan Peoples-Jones, Tariq Black, Nico Collins, they're going to need to get some separation on the outside. They're going to need to have really good games, not just in catching the ball and stuff like that, but I think their route running needs to be really precise in this game because Florida has some really good defensive backs. Brad Stewart, Duke Dawson, Chauncey Gardner, they've got some really good defensive backs, and they have really made some offenses sputter this year in the passing game. So if the Michigan wide receivers can get some separation on the outside, that should be easier throws for Shea Patterson, who's been up and down this year, and I think that'll be a big thing for the Michigan offense. Another thing, Karan Higdon, he was really kind of he was on and off in the Ohio State game. He had an okay stat line. He had about 70 yards on about 16 carries, but nothing special from him. And they're going to need a good performance from him. The offensive line is going to need to play great. Florida also has a great defensive line. That is probably the strength of their defense, even though they have strong DBs, and that's why their defense is so great. They've got great linebackers, great DBs, and an all-country defensive line. Ja'Kai Polite is one of the best defensive linemen in the country. He and Voshawn Joseph, who's a linebacker, pretty much single-handedly beat LSU earlier in the year. So if Michigan wants to do well on offense, they're going to have to watch out for those two players. For Florida on offense, I don't think it's going to be pretty for Florida. I think Michigan is going to be pissed off. They're going to be angry after giving up 62 points to Ohio State 2 weeks ago in the last game of the season. Michigan could have been in the playoff if they would have won that game, hypothetically, but they ended up giving up 62 points to a very good offense, but I don't think anyone expected them to give up 62 points. They were the number one total offense in the entire country, total defense in the entire country, rather, and they gave up 62 points. Dwayne Haskins just absolutely went off, and I think a big thing for Michigan is how are the DBs going to respond? Are they going to come out and play flat like they did at Ohio State, which is a big reason why they gave up 62 points. People were running wide open all over the field, and Dwayne Haskins was just making easy throws. But I think the best unit for Michigan is got to be the defensive line. Rashawn Gary and Chase Winovich are two of the best pass rushers in the entire country. Florida has a solid offensive line. They've been a little banged up over the year, but if they can get healthy, they can use this extra month to prepare. If they can get healthy, that should help them. But I don't see Florida scoring a ton of points here. I think it's going to be a very low-scoring game on both ends, but it should be a great game. So the next game we've got the Fiesta Bowl in Arizona, LSU versus UCF. LSU number 11 at 9-3. UCF obviously undefeated 13-0 at number 8. Thought they should have been in the playoff. I don't agree with it, but they're 13-0. So I think the most important thing in this game is I think you have to look at LSU's defense because that is what has carried them this entire year. And right now, they have both of their starting cornerbacks, out of the game. Greedy Williams is going to the draft. He's not playing in the game. And then Christian Fulton, who has been spectacular all year for them, is also out in this game. He's got an injury. So while I think Daryl Mack for UCF, who is a backup quarterback because their star quarterback, Mackenzie Milton, got injured, I don't think he's as potent through the air. With backup cornerbacks in, there's going to be lanes to throw the ball. Terrence Alexander, Kerry Vincent, and Kelvin Joseph are most likely going to be the cornerbacks for LSU. Kelvin Joseph, just a freshman, hasn't gotten much playing time, and Kerry Vincent and Terrence Alexander, they're pretty small. They're more of nickelbacks guarding slot receivers, so it's going to be tough for them to cover outside receivers. Daryl Mack, in his one game starting, he went 19 of 27, also had a couple touchdowns, over 200 yards passing. So he's not a terrible passer. He's a good passer. But that game was against Memphis, not a great defense. I think a big key for the LSU defense is Devin White, not just Devin White, but mostly Devin White in how he can stop Daryl Mack's running attack, because that is what he is good at. He is a running quarterback. And if you can force him into just passing and make sure that they keep that pocket contained, make sure he doesn't get out and scramble any, that should really help the cornerbacks that aren't playing that well, if they're not playing well. Yeah. So I think UCF will score a good amount of points, but I think the way this game will be close is UCF doesn't have the greatest defense. LSU really has struggled this year on offense. Obviously got shut out at Alabama, looked bad against Florida, so they haven't really looked good all year. But I think this could be a breakout game for them because UCF has given up a lot of points to a lot of bad teams. So I think if Joe Burrow can, play like he did towards the end of the Texas A&M game, throw the ball well, find some open receivers, and maybe run the ball a little bit. Coach O was quoted the other day saying, with a lot of good quarterback talent coming into LSU, maybe they can think about, starting this game and next year running him a little bit more because they have good talent behind him. So, the receivers are going to be important for this game. Justin Jefferson, Stephon Sullivan, D. Anderson, tight end Foster Moreau, Jonathan Giles, all those guys, they're going to need to get separation, give Joe Burrow some easy throws. Another big thing, LSU offensive line. LSU has struggled offensively on the offensive line all year. If they can get it going, if they can really just run the ball down UCF's throat, that'll really help Joe Burrow. And, that'll really help Joe Burrow. So the next game we're talking about is Washington and Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. Washington ranked at number 9 in the country, Ohio State at number 6 in the country. This is probably the best game of the 4 games that aren't the playoffs. So Ohio State obviously disappointed to not be in the playoffs at 12-1. They lost by 30 to Purdue earlier in the season. That is, in the end, what kept them out of the playoffs. But right now they're playing incredible football. The past 2 games they played great. They put up 62 on the number 1 offense in the country in Michigan, and then they put up over 40 against Northwestern in the Big Ten championship. But Washington has a really good defense. People don't credit them a lot because they play in the Pac-12. They don't play as good of competition, but Byron Young, Taylor Rapp, they have some really good defensive players in Washington, and it starts with their DBs. And I think that's where it needs to start against Ohio State, because Ohio State has some playmakers on the outside. Paris Campbell, one of the fastest players in all of college football. KJ Hill, Chris Olave. They've got Benjamin Victor also. They've got some really good, talented receivers on the outside. So if Washington can kind of lock those guys down, Haskins really hasn't needed to make any really tight throws in these past 2 games. Michigan just kind of disappeared. They didn't play any real good defense. So, I mean, Haskins, if he's got open receivers all day, then I find it hard for Washington to win this game. But if they can do that, then Ohio State's going to have to rely on the run game, which has been up and down all year. J.K. Dobbins, who looked like an All-American as a freshman last year, and then Mike Weber, who's a veteran guy. He should be able to take games over, but he just simply hasn't done it this year. If they can get that running game going, that'll also really help Ohio State, because it hasn't been there a lot of the year. They've relied a lot on Haskins' arm. In the Purdue loss, Haskins threw 70 passes, and that was a record, and not a good record that you want to break. For Washington on offense, Washington, they haven't been the strongest team offensively all year, but I believe that against this Ohio State defense that isn't the greatest, I think they can score some points. I think the biggest thing, they need to run the ball well. Jake Browning isn't a quarterback that's going to be able to slice you and dice you no matter what. So I think if Myles Gaskin and Savon Ahmed can really get going on the ground, I think that'll really help Browning make some easier throws. I think key players for Ohio State on defense are going to be Tuff Borland and Malik Harrison. I think in a game where they played solid defense against Michigan, they had pretty much the games of their lives. So I think if they can play well, that'll really bode well for Ohio State's chances defensively. Moving on to the 2 most important games, the playoff games. We've got Clemson and Notre Dame, both undefeated. Clemson 13-0, Notre Dame 12-0 because they didn't play a conference championship, obviously. So we're going to start with Clemson on offense. Clemson on offense is great all year. Notre Dame defensively has been, middle of the pack, mediocre. They haven't played a ton of great teams, so we don't really know. That is the thing with Notre Dame. They might come out and they might beat Clemson by 20. They also might come out and they might lose to Clemson by 30. But we really don't know because Notre Dame hasn't played a ton of good teams. They played Michigan in the first game of the season, but that Michigan was a very different Michigan team than is now. So I think Trevor Lawrence, the quarterback for Clemson, who's a freshman, got the starting job 4 games into the season, forced the backup to transfer, actually. I think he's going to have a really good game. I think that the biggest matchup for Clemson, I think it's going to be whoever is not on Julian Love. And when I say that, Julian Love is a cornerback for Notre Dame. He was one of the best 3 cornerbacks in the country. He was voted 3rd in the Thorpe Award, which is the best defensive back in the country. So I think whoever he guards, which is most likely going to be T. Higgins, I think it's probably going to be Amari Rodgers on the other cornerback, which is Troy Pride Jr. I think that's the matchup that they're going to need to go at because I don't see anyone really racking up a lot of catches or yards or touchdowns on Julian Love. I just don't see it happening. So I think if they can really go at Troy Pride Jr., who is going to be guarding most likely Amari Rodgers, I think that'll bode very well for Clemson. And I haven't even talked about Travis Etienne, who is from Louisiana, one of the best running backs in the entire country. He has gone absolutely off this year. Was in the Heisman race for a little while, but fell off because they didn't give him as many carries. But I think he's very important in this game. I think he's going to get a lot of carries. And if he can really, manipulate the clock, manipulate the clock, and not give Notre Dame as much time on offense. I think that'll be really helpful for Clemson. Defensively for Clemson, Clemson's been very good all year defensively, but again, like Notre Dame, they haven't played a ton of good teams. Notre Dame has at least played Michigan, who's in the top 10. Clemson hasn't played a top 10 team all year, and that's why they're 13-0. No doubt they're a good team, but they really haven't played many good people. So Clemson, defensively, I think they're going to have a good day against Notre Dame. I think Ian Book, who was inserted as the starter earlier in the year, I think he's going to struggle in this game. I think Trayvon Mullen, cornerback for Clemson, he's gonna really lock up Miles Boykin, number one receiver for Notre Dame. So I think Notre Dame, they don't have a great running attack. Jafar Armstrong had a couple good games, but I don't think their offensive line is capable enough to take down the vaunted Clemson defensive line with maybe 4 first-round draft picks: Austin Bryant, Cleveland Farrell, Dexter Lawrence, and Christian Wilkins, all absolute stars. So I think the Clemson defense is going to come down to their defensive line, and I think that's what's going to give them the edge. And to the last game of the 6, we've got the playoff game, Oklahoma, number 4, 12-1, versus the undefeated 13-0, number 1, Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama got pretty lucky last week, or 2 weeks ago rather, to get out of the SEC championship game with a win, thanks to Jalen Hurts coming in and saving Tua Tagovailoa, scoring 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. But in this game, it's going to be Tua. And the question for Oklahoma defensively is, can they get Alabama to punt even once? That is my question, because I don't know if they can, honestly. Oklahoma's defense has been one of the worst in the country all year. It has been their offense carrying them to this point, and that's just how they play in the Big 12. And honestly, I don't see Oklahoma getting many stops against Tua Tagovailoa. That very good receiving core and a very good offensive line and a very good running back system down there. Najee Harris, Josh Jacobs, Damian Harris, a lot of good players in Alabama. And I don't think Alabama will get stopped by Oklahoma, maybe until midway through the third quarter, maybe when the game's out of reach. Moving on to offense for Oklahoma, which is what they want to be on. The Heisman winner, Kyler Murray, will he have a good game? He hasn't played a defense like Alabama. I expect him to do well, but I think the key matchup for Oklahoma is for their center, actually, Creed Humphrey. He's going to have to go against Quinnen Williams, maybe the best interior defensive lineman in the country. He can single-handedly make an offense do bad in a game. Against LSU, he had 10 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, and 2.5 sacks. He single-handedly disrupted LSU's entire offense in that huge game that was a couple months ago. If Creed Humphrey can block Quinnen Williams up and make sure he doesn't have that kind of impact in this game, I think Oklahoma can score some points, because Alabama, their weakness on defense is their defensive backfield. Although they have an All-American at safety in Deontay Thompson, on the corners, they don't have great corners. Savion Smith is a transfer. He hasn't played very well this year. Patrick Surtain, who is a 5-star cornerback, but he's just a freshman. He hasn't played in these moments. You don't know how he's going to play. I think if Oklahoma wants to win this game, they're going to have to go at those corners. And I think the biggest part of that is going to be Marquise Hollywood Brown. Marquise Brown, one of the best receivers in the country, nominated for the Biletnikoff, and also one of the fastest players in the country. So I think that's important, because if he can get deep and beat Alabama deep, Kyler Murray's not going to miss many throws. And if he does, he's going to go right back to him. And if Alabama can't stop Marquise Brown, they're going to be in for a long day. So that's all I've got for the 6 games. I'm going to make my predictions now. So, Sugar Bowl, Georgia versus Texas. Although Texas is an intriguing team, they're a very good team. They beat Oklahoma earlier in the year. I'm going to have to go with Georgia. I think the way they played 2 weeks ago in the SEC championship is that of one of the best 4 teams in the country, whether it be ahead of Notre Dame or Oklahoma or Clemson, whoever you want to put it ahead of. The way they played 2 weeks ago is one of the top 4 teams in the country. If Drake Fromm and DeAndre Swift play like that, nobody's beating them, except for maybe Alabama. And their defense is rocking and rolling. Hopefully Texas doesn't bring in a backup quarterback this time to beat them like Alabama did. But I'm going to go with Georgia. I think it's going to be fairly high scoring. I'm going to go with 31-17 Bulldogs. Now, Michigan versus Florida in the Peach Bowl. I'm going to go with Michigan. I don't think there's going to be a ton of points scored here. I think the difference is I think both of them have top-notch defenses, but I think Michigan has a slightly above average offense. I think Florida has a slightly below average offense. I think that's the difference in this game. I think final score about 21-10 Michigan. I think Shea Patterson will have a couple touchdowns. Karan Higg did maybe a couple of nice runs in there. So I'm going Michigan. LSU UCF in the Fiesta Bowl. I'm going UCF. A lot of people are picking LSU, and LSU is probably the more talented team, probably the better coach team, probably the all-around better team. But I think for UCF, this is their Super Bowl. For UCF, this is their shot. If they win this game, they will now be close to 30 wins in a row and still not in the playoff, and will have had 2 wins over top 11 SEC teams in 2 years, and that'll be their statement to get into the playoff. And I don't think it matters for LSU. I think at a certain point in the year, they had their heart set on going to the playoff, and they're not in the playoff now. I think the Texas A&M game might anger them a little bit because it was very controversial the way they lost. But I still think UCF, it means too much to UCF, and it means too little to LSU. And that's why I'm picking UCF. I'm going to go with 35-27 UCF. Washington versus Ohio State. I don't think this game is going to be as close as people think. I don't think Washington's offense can get it done. I think Ohio State's offense will get it done. I'm going to go with 35-20. 35-20, I think that's a good score. I think Dwayne Haskins will have a nice game. And then I just don't think Washington's offense is good enough to contend with Ohio State's defense. Moving on to the playoff games. In Clemson versus Notre Dame, I don't think this game will be close at all. I think Clemson's a very good team, and I don't think Notre Dame's a very good team. Obviously, they're good enough to get in the playoff, but I don't think they're a playoff-worthy team. They haven't really played anyone. I'm going to go with Clemson 42, Notre Dame, we'll go 17. We'll give them 17. I just don't think Notre Dame can really do much on offense. Their offensive line has been plagued by injury all year. Their captain, left guard Alex Bars, has been out for the season since, I think, September. So that'll really hurt them in this game. And Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, Austin Bryant, Cleveland Farrell, like I mentioned, they're just all first-round draft picks, second-round draft picks. They're going to have a field day, and I just don't think Notre Dame can do enough offensively to keep up. And then for the last game, Alabama versus Oklahoma. Well, I think Oklahoma gives Alabama a scare early. I think, they score a couple points early, maybe even take the lead a little bit. I think Alabama pulls away in the end. I think that defensive line is going to shackle down Oklahoma in the second half. I'm going to go with 49-38 in favor of Alabama. I think it's going to be a really high-scoring game. I think Kyler Murray will have a nice game, but I think Tua Tagovailoa and that Alabama offense will just absolutely go off on a really poor Oklahoma defense. So, all right, well, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you for watching. Again, this has been Wyatt Vaughn with the New Orleans Junior Journalism Program, and I'll see you next time.